Before we get started, I want to hear from you. Drop your city in the comments right now. Whether you're in Louisiana, Texas, Florida, or anywhere in between, I want to know who's here. And if this is your first time on this channel, please hit that subscribe button. We put out a new story every single week, and I promise you, you don't want to miss what's coming. Today's story is about a 74-year-old woman named Loretta Mae Dupree. She was a home health aide. For 31 years, she drove to other people's houses in the early morning and helped them get dressed and made their coffee and sat with them when they were afraid and held their hands when they were dying. She gave her days to strangers who needed her. She came home tired. She came home every night to a house she owned and 3 children she had raised, and a life she had built out of almost nothing, with her own hands and her own will, and a stubbornness about doing right that had been in her family for as long as anyone could remember. She was not a complicated woman. She did not want complicated things. She wanted her children to be all right. She wanted her little shotgun house on Magnolia Street to stay standing. She wanted in her old age a little peace. She did not get peace. What she got instead from the children she had given everything to was a lesson in what love looks like when it runs out of patience for an old woman who can no longer give anything back. But here is what Loretta Dupree's children did not understand about their mother. She had spent 31 years caring for elderly people. She had seen every variety of family come through those rooms. She had watched sons arrive once a year with flowers and guilt. She had watched daughters cry convincingly in doorways while signing papers they had already decided to sign. She had held the hands of people whose families had taken their money, their property, their dignity, and left them with nothing but the professional kindness of a home health aide. She had paid attention. And when the time came when she finally understood what was being done to her, she was not confused. She was not helpless. She was not the woman her children had decided she was. She was Loretta Dupree, and she had been paying attention her whole life. This is her story. Loretta had lived on Magnolia Street in Baton Rouge for 42 years. The house was a shotgun, the kind of narrow, straight-through structure common all over southern Louisiana where rooms lined up one behind another like train cars. Her mother had left it to her when she died in 1998, and before that, Loretta's grandmother had lived in it, and before that, a great aunt whose name had been lost to time but whose habit of planting 4 o'clocks along the front walk had never quite died out. The flowers came up every summer, whether anyone planted them or not. Loretta had always taken that as a sign of something of persistence, maybe, of things that survive without being asked. She had raised her 3 children in that house. Calvin, the oldest, who was 51 now, and lived in Houston and worked in insurance. Renee, 48, who had a beauty salon in Metairie that had done well for a while, and then for a complicated series of reasons Loretta had never fully understood, had not. Darnell, the youngest at 45, who had lived his entire life within 12 miles of Magnolia Street, and who had been, for the last 11 years, the one Loretta saw most often. That proximity had felt like love for a long time. It had taken Loretta a while to understand what it actually was. Her husband, Henry, had died 20 years ago, a brain bleed sudden and complete, the kind that gives no warning and offers no negotiation. He was there on a Sunday morning and gone by Sunday afternoon, and Loretta had stood in the hospital hallway and felt the whole architecture of her future rearrange itself around an absence. She had been 54. The children were grown but not yet settled. She had gone back to work the following Monday because there was a woman on Bayou Vista Drive who needed her, and because staying home with her grief felt dangerous in a way she couldn't name. She managed. She had always managed. Henry had been a good man, a quiet man, a pipe fitter at the refinery who had worked steady and never raised his hand and fixed things when they broke. He had not left her much in material terms. He had left her the house, which was paid off in a small life insurance policy, and the knowledge that she had been loved in a consistent and uncomplicated way for 31 years. She did not take that for granted. She had seen enough of other people's marriages in her work to know that what she had had was not ordinary. She had also left herself with debts she had taken on for her children. This was the part Loretta did not talk about much. It was not in her nature to keep score, but the truth was that she had co-signed on Renee's salon loan when Renee's credit wouldn't carry it alone for $42,000 that Renee had serviced for 3 years. And then when the salon started struggling, stopped servicing, leaving Loretta to cover the payments for 14 months before the bank finally agreed to a modified settlement. The total damage to Loretta's savings had been just under $19,000. She had not mentioned it to Renee, She had not wanted to make Renee feel worse than she already did. She had given Calvin $4,000 in 2019 when he and his wife were underwater on a home equity line and facing a balloon payment. He had paid back $2,000. He had not mentioned the remaining $2,000 again, and neither had Loretta. Darnell had lived rent-free in Loretta's house from 2013 to 2017 while he was figuring things out. He had never paid rent. He had, to his credit, fixed the back fence and painted the kitchen. Loretta had been glad to have him there. She had convinced herself for a long time that the arrangement had been mutual, that he had given as much as he had taken. She was not sure she still believed that. None of this was unusual. None of this was different from the stories of 100 mothers Loretta had known or cared for, or sat beside in the blue late afternoon light of rooms where old people waited for the people who loved them to come. Mothers gave. Children received. The accounting was never quite even, but love was not supposed to be accounting, and Loretta had never wanted to be the kind of mother who kept a ledger. What she had not understood until recently was that her children had been keeping one. It started, or rather the part Loretta could see started, in the fall of 2022 when she applied for a Louisiana home modification grant. Her left knee had been bad for 2 years. Her doctor had been talking to her about replacing it, and Loretta had been putting it off because the recovery time worried her. 6 weeks on crutches, limited mobility, no driving, and she could not imagine being that dependent on anyone. But the knee was getting worse, and in the meantime there were practical concerns. The 2 steps up to the front door had become genuinely difficult on bad days, and the narrow doorframe of the bathroom was not wheelchair accessible if it ever came to that. A caseworker at her senior center had told her about a state program, a modification grant for low-income home owners over 65, covering things like grab bars, ramp installation, widened door frames. The grant required proof of home ownership. She had given them her address and her name. She had been certain the rest would be routine. The caseworker called her back 3 days later. Her voice was careful, in the way of someone delivering news they had been trained to deliver neutrally. "Ms. Dupree," she said, "I'm having some difficulty verifying your ownership of the property." Loretta was quiet for a moment. "I've owned that house for 42 years, she said. "My mother left it to me." "Yes, ma'am, that's what the older records show. But there appears to be a more recent deed on file with the parish dated about 3 years ago that shows a life estate transfer." The words made no sense to Loretta immediately. She did not know what a life estate was. She said so. "It's a type of deed," the caseworker explained slowly and carefully. "It means you retain the right to live in the property for the rest of your life, but ownership, legal ownership, has been transferred to another party. The remainder man." "I don't understand," Loretta said. "I didn't sign anything like that." A pause. "The deed on file shows your notarized signature, Ms. Dupree. The remainder man listed is your son, Darnell James Dupree." Loretta sat down. She sat at her kitchen table, the same table she had sat at when Calvin came home from his first day of high school, when Renee told her about the salon, when Darnell called from jail that one time when he was 22, and never again, and she sat very still and tried to understand what she had just been told. Her house, her name on a deed, Darnell's name on a deed, a signature she did not remember making. "When was this filed?" she asked. "April 2021, ma'am." "April 2021. She thought back. She had been 73. She had been recovering from a bout of shingles that had knocked her flat for 3 weeks. She had been tired. Darnell had been coming around more than usual, helping with things, bringing groceries, being attentive in a way that had touched her because she had not asked for it. He had brought papers for her to sign more than once that spring. Some of it was real. Her car insurance renewal, a medical consent form, something to do with her Medicare supplement. She had trusted him with all of it. She had signed what he put in front of her. She had not read everything carefully. She had been sick. She had trusted her son. "Thank you," Loretta said to the caseworker. Her voice was steady. "I'll look into this." She hung up and sat for a long time. Outside the kitchen window, the 4 o'clocks along the front walk were just coming in small, tight buds, pink and yellow and white, the same flowers that had been coming up on that walk since before Loretta was born. She thought about the 31 years she had spent caring for other people's parents. She thought about all the papers she had watched family members bring into those rooms. She thought, "I should have known." Then she thought, "I need to understand this before I say a word to anyone." She called her neighbor, Miss Celestine Broussard, that evening. Miss Celestine was 79 years old and had retired 12 years ago from a career as a paralegal at a Baton Rouge civil law firm. She was a small, precise woman who grew dahlias in her backyard and read 2 newspapers a day and had, in Loretta's estimation, forgotten more about Louisiana property law than most people ever learned. They had been neighbors for 27 years. They had sat on each other's porches through husbands dying and children leaving and the slow accumulation of the years. Loretta told her what the caseworker had said. Miss Celestine was quiet for a moment. "Do you have anything that looks like a deed?" she asked. "Anything Darnell might have left you a copy of?" "No," Loretta said. "I didn't know any deed existed." "All right, I can pull the parish records myself. I still know how to access the database. Give me until tomorrow morning." She called back at 8 the next day. "Loretta," she said, and her voice had changed. It had gone precise in a way that Loretta recognized as the voice Miss Celestine used when she was being very careful. "I have the deed in front of me. It's a life estate deed recorded April 14th, 2021. Your name is on it as the life tenant. Darnell's name is on it as the remainder man. It is notarized by a man named Robert Arsenault, Notary Public Commission number 87,441. "I didn't sign it," Loretta said. "I didn't know I was signing it." A pause. "I believe you," Miss Celestine said. "But Loretta, I need you to listen to me carefully. Even if you signed something without understanding what it was, that deed is currently recorded and legally operative. Your house, as the law stands right now, belongs to Darnell after your death. He has vested ownership interest already." Loretta said nothing. "But here is what I want you to look at," Miss Celestine continued. "The notary Robert Arsenault, commission 87,441. I looked him up in the state notary database. And his commission expired in December of 2019, 16 months before this deed was supposedly notarized by him." The silence stretched. "He wasn't an active notary when this was signed," Loretta said. "According to the state database number, he was not, which means the notarization on this deed, if the date is accurate, was performed by a man who had no legal authority to perform it." Loretta looked at the 4 o'clocks through her kitchen window. The buds were open now in the morning light. "Miss Celestine," she said, "I need an attorney." "Yes," Miss Celestine said, "you do, and I think I know who to call." That night, Loretta called Darnell. She did not tell him what she had found out. She had learned in 31 years of care work that when something serious was wrong, you did not announce your knowledge before you were ready. You listened. You watched. You let the other person tell you what they thought you knew. "How you doing, Mama?" he said. He sounded easy, comfortable, the way a person sounds when they are not expecting anything. "I'm all right," she said. "My knee has been bothering me. I was looking at that home modification program, the one the senior center mentioned." "Yeah," a pause, very brief. "How'd that go?" "They had some trouble verifying my ownership," she said. "Some kind of paperwork issue. You know anything about that?" Another pause, slightly longer. "I don't know," he said. "Probably just some kind of recording error. The parish offices are slow. You want me to look into it?" "No," she said. "I think I've got it handled. Just checking in." She got off the phone and sat with what she had heard in those pauses. She had been listening to people for 31 years. She had listened to family members explain why they hadn't visited. She had listened to old people explain why the money was gone. She had learned the specific texture of a lie spoken by someone who believes they will not be caught. She recognized it. She opened a composition notebook, one she kept in the kitchen drawer, for grocery lists and phone numbers, to a fresh page. She wrote the date at the top. She wrote, "Darnell knows." He paused when I mentioned the paperwork. He offered to look into it and then walked it back. She thought, "He doesn't know that I know what I know. That's the only advantage I have. I need to keep it." She capped her pen and put the notebook in the back of the drawer under the phone book she never used but had never thrown away. She went to bed. She lay awake for a long time looking at the ceiling. She had looked at it for 42 years, and she thought about her children, and she thought about what she had given them, and she thought about what apparently they had decided that meant. Then she thought, you raised yourself 3 children. You buried your husband. You held the hands of people dying in rooms where their families didn't come. You have been doing hard things your entire life. This is just one more. She turned over and went to sleep. She had a meeting with an attorney in the morning. If you've made it this far, please hit that subscribe button right now. Stories like Loretta's deserve to be heard, and I want to make sure you don't miss what happens next. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see where this story is traveling. And stay with me, because what comes out in the next part changes everything. The attorney's name was Vivian Arsenault, not a relation to the notary. Arsenault was a common name in South Louisiana, as common as rain. But the coincidence had not been lost on Miss Celestine when she made the call, and it had not been lost on Vivian Arsenault either, who had noted it with a brief dry humor that Loretta would come to understand was her version of a smile. Vivian was 56 years old. She had practiced elder law in Baton Rouge for 24 years. She was small and dark-haired and wore reading glasses on a cord around her neck, and had the particular quality of stillness that Loretta recognized in people who had learned over a long time to save their energy for what mattered. She had grown up in Napoleonville. Her mother had been a home health aide. "I know what your work is," she told Loretta at their first meeting. "I know what you've seen in those rooms." "Then you know what I'm afraid of," Loretta said. "Yes," Vivian said, "I do." She had reviewed the deed before Loretta arrived. She had looked up the notary. She had pulled the commission records and the state notary verification system and confirmed what Miss Celestine had found. Robert Arsenault's commission had expired December 31st, 2019. The deed was dated April 14th, 2021. The gap was 16 months. In Louisiana, Vivian explained, a notarization performed by someone whose commission has lapsed is invalid. It carries no legal force. The deed itself may still be challengeable on other grounds, your signature obtained under circumstances that constitute fraud, but the invalid notarization is on its own grounds to void the instrument entirely. Loretta listened carefully. "What I need to know from you," Vivian continued, "is the context of that April 2021 signing. What documents you remember signing. What Darnell told you, if anything, about what you were signing. What your physical and mental condition was at that time." Loretta told her about the shingles, about the tiredness, about the documents Darnell had been bringing throughout that spring, real documents, mixed with apparently at least one that was not what he said it was. "Did he explain the life estate concept to you?" "No, he never used those words. He never said anything about a deed." "Do you recall signing anything in April of that year that he described as relating to your property?" Loretta thought carefully. She had turned this over many times since the caseworker's call. "He brought something," she said slowly. "He said it was a Medicaid planning document. He explained, or said he was explaining, that it was paperwork that would protect the house if I ever needed nursing home care, that the state sometimes tried to recover from estates after death. He said this was a way to make sure that couldn't happen." Vivian's expression did not change, but she wrote something on her legal pad. "He framed it as protecting you," she said. "Yes." "That framing is not entirely false," Vivian said. "There are legitimate Medicaid planning instruments that function somewhat like what he described. That's likely why you accepted the explanation. But a life estate deed, as he has used it, does not protect you. It transfers ownership to him. The protection in this case was for Darnell, not for you." The room was quiet. "He told me it was for me," Loretta said. "Yes," Vivian said, "he did." Vivian filed the suit to void the deed the following month. The legal theory was straightforward. The deed was void on its face due to the invalid notarization, and independently voidable due to fraud in the inducement. Loretta had been misled about the nature of the document she was signing. Vivian named Darnell as the sole defendant in the deed challenge. She filed simultaneously with the Louisiana Secretary of State's Notary Enforcement Division, flagging the use of a lapsed notary stamp and requesting an investigation into how the commission number had come to be applied to a post-expiration document. The investigation would take time. Vivian explained that the notary enforcement process moved slowly but moved surely, and that the question of how a lapsed commission had been affixed to a document in 2021 was one the state had a strong institutional interest in answering. Within 2 weeks of the filing, Loretta received the first call from Calvin. She had not told Calvin or Renee that she had filed suit. She had told them nothing about any of it. She had been waiting, following Vivian's advice, to understand the full shape of things before she did. "Mama," Calvin said. His voice was careful. "I got a call from Darnell." "Did you?" "He's upset. He says you're suing him." "I am," Loretta said. "Over the house. Over a deed I signed without understanding what I was signing." Loretta said, "That transferred ownership of my house to him." A pause. "I didn't know about that," Calvin said. "I know you didn't," Loretta said, "because I didn't know about it either until 2 months ago. Mama, he says he was trying to protect the house for the family. He says you knew what you were signing." Calvinist Loretta said, "I know what I signed and what I was told I was signing. Those were not the same thing." "He's saying you've been confused, that you've been having some memory issues." Loretta was very quiet for a moment. "Calvin," she said, "I want you to think very carefully about what you just said to me." A long pause. "He says, I heard what you said, he says. I am asking you now, Do you believe that I am confused? Have you seen confusion in me? Have you ever in your life known your mother to be confused? The silence lasted 5 seconds. No, ma'am, Calvin said quietly. Then I will thank you not to repeat that characterization again. She heard him exhale. What do you want me to do? He asked. Nothing right now, she said. I have an attorney. Let her do her job. She hung up and added the call to her composition notebook. 3 days later, Renee called. Then Darnell himself called twice, and when Loretta didn't answer, left a voicemail in a voice that started conciliatory and ended toward the close of 2 minutes with a quality she had not heard from him in many years, the high-tight anger of a man who has made a plan and is watching it fail. She wrote down everything. Dates times what was said. The composition notebook was filling up. The investigation into the notary took 4 months. Vivian had anticipated this. Louisiana's notary enforcement process was thorough but slow. There were forms and investigators and correspondence with the former notary himself, whose name on the lapse commission had been affixed to a document more than a year after his authority to do so had ceased. The former notary, Robert Arsenault, was 71 years old and lived in Gonzales. He had retired from notarial practice in 2019, as the records showed. When investigators contacted him, he was cooperative, and Vivian said visibly disturbed. He had not notarized the Dupree deed. He had not been to Baton Rouge in the relevant period. He had not met Loretta Dupree. He had not been presented with any document for her signature. He had, however, reported to state authorities in mid-2021, some months after the date on the deed, that his notary stamp had been stolen from his home office during a period when his adult son had been living with him. He had filed a report. The report was on record. The stamp had been stolen. The report had been filed by someone who had not at the time connected the theft to any specific fraudulent use. Now they could connect it. Vivian called Loretta on a Thursday afternoon to tell her. The stamp was stolen, Loretta said. Reported stolen in July 2021, Vivian said. The timing is consistent with someone using it in April, then returning it or not returning it, and the former notary discovering its absence later. His son, who was living in the house at the time of the theft, has since moved. The investigators are working on establishing whether there is a connection between the son and your son. Darnell didn't know Robert Arsenault, Loretta said, but he might have known someone who did. That's the question the state investigators are pursuing, Vivian said. Our job is narrower. We need to void the deed and restore your ownership. The criminal question is theirs. I understand, Loretta said. Are you all right? Loretta considered the question honestly. I'm angry, she said. I've been angry since October, but I'm not frightened. Good, Vivian said. Anger is useful. Fear is not. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in March. Loretta had been waiting for it for 7 months. 7 months of phone calls she documented and family pressure she absorbed without letting it move her, and the slow, particular loneliness of knowing something about the people closest to you that you have not yet been allowed to say out loud in a room where it matters. She had gone to church every Sunday. She had sat on her porch in the evenings with Miss Celestine and talked about dahlias and the news and things that had nothing to do with deeds. She had tended her 4 o'clocks. She had not told her children more than they needed to know. Calvin had settled into a wary neutrality. He was not helping Darnell, but he was not helping Loretta either, and she had accepted that as the best he was going to manage. Renee had called twice more, and both times had been tearful and vague, suggesting that Loretta was tearing the family apart and that surely there was a way to work this out between them. Loretta had been kind and firm and had changed the subject both times. Darnell had retained an attorney, a man named Graham Foray, who practiced general civil law in Baton Rouge and who had sent a response to Vivian's filing that argued Loretta had signed the deed voluntarily and with full understanding of its terms, and that any confusion about its nature was a product of subsequent misrepresentation by third parties. That argument, Loretta had noted when Vivian explained it to her, had not addressed the notary. He can't address the notary, Vivian said. There is nothing to say about the notary that helps his client. The hearing was held in the 19th Judicial District Court in Baton Rouge, a modern building on St. Louis Street with high ceilings and fluorescent light, in the institutional calm of a place where serious things were decided with paperwork and patience. Judge Adeline Terode presided, a 58-year-old woman who had been on the bench for 14 years and who Vivian had described as precise, unsentimental, and very familiar with elder financial abuse cases. Loretta dressed carefully, her good navy dress, her mother's gold cross which she wore on a thin chain at her throat, low heels, her composition notebook in her purse, though she had been told she would not need it in the hearing itself. Vivian had prepared everything. Miss Celestine drove her. They sat in the parking lot for a moment before going in. "How are you feeling?" Miss Celestine asked. "Like I've been waiting 7 months," Loretta said. "I'm ready to stop waiting." The hearing lasted 3 hours. Vivian presented the case in the order she had built it. The deed itself, the notary commission records, the state verification that Robert Arsenault's authority had lapsed 16 months before the date of the notarization, the theft report he had filed in July 2021. She presented Loretta's testimony, given clearly, precisely in the direct manner of a woman who had spent 31 years dealing in facts about the circumstances of the April 2021 signing the Shingles recovery, what Darnell had told her the document was, and what it had actually been. Graham Ferre argued on Darnell's behalf that the lapse commission was an administrative error, that Robert Arsenault had performed the notarization de facto as a recognized public servant, and that technical defects in commission status should not be used to invalidate otherwise valid instruments. Judge Turode asked him mildly whether he was aware of the theft report. Ferret said he had reviewed it and considered it unconnected to the present matter. Judge Turode looked at him for a moment. "Counsel," she said, "a man whose notary stamp was stolen and who reported that theft to state authorities had that stamp used to notarize a deed by your account 3 months before the theft was reported. You're asking me to read those facts as unconnected." Ferret said that the timing was coincidental and that there was no established evidentiary link between the theft and the document. Judge Turode did not respond to this. She made a note. Vivian called Loretta to testify. Loretta sat in the witness chair, straight-backed, hands folded the way she had sat in doctor's waiting rooms and hospital hallways, and the chairs beside countless sick beds, where she had waited for the next thing that needed doing, and she answered Vivian's questions in the particular calm of someone who has nothing to hide and everything to protect. Vivian asked her about the April 2021 signing. "Tell the court in your own words what Darnell told you you were signing that day." "He said it was a Medicaid planning document," Loretta said. "He said that if I ever needed long-term nursing care, the state of Louisiana had the right to make a claim against my estate after I died. He said this was a form that would protect my house from that claim. He said it was for my benefit. He did not use the words life estate." "No, ma'am." "He did not explain that the document transferred any ownership interest in your home to him." "Oh." "No, ma'am. If he had explained that, I would not have signed it." Vivian asked her one more question. "Ms. Dupree, when your son Darnell needed a place to live in 2013, what did you say to him?" Loretta was quiet for a moment. "I said yes," she said. "I told him to come home." "Did you charge him rent?" "No." "Why not?" "Because he needed help," Loretta said simply. "He was my son. When my children needed something from me, I tried to give it to them. That's what a mother does." The courtroom was very quiet. "That's all," Vivian said. Judge Turode ruled from the bench that afternoon. "The court finds," she said, reading from the notes she had been making throughout the hearing, "that the deed dated April 14th, 2021, purporting to convey a life estate in the property located at 1142 Magnolia Street, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, was executed with a notarization that was invalid on its face. The notary whose commission number appears on the document had no legal authority to perform notarial acts as of that date. A notarization by an individual without current commission authority is null and void under Louisiana law, and an instrument so notarized carries no legal effect." She set down her notes. The court further finds that even were the notarization valid, the evidence presented is sufficient to establish that the grantor, Miss Loretta Mae Dupree, did not execute this deed with informed consent to its terms. She was told the document served a purpose it did not serve. She was not informed that she was conveying ownership rights. The instrument was obtained through misrepresentation. She looked up. "The deed is void. Title to the property at 1142 Magnolia Street is restored to Loretta Mae Dupree. In fee simple as of this date, the defendant shall bear all costs of this proceeding." She paused. "I am also referring the circumstances of this notarization, specifically the use of a stolen stamp belonging to a retired notary, to the East Baton Rouge Parish District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges. The court's record in this matter will be made available in full." Darnell, sitting at the defense table with Graham Ferre, looked at the surface of the table. His expression did not change. He had his mother's capacity for stillness. She had given him that too, she thought, watching him. He had learned it from her. She looked away. She thought, "The house is mine. That's what I came here for." She gathered herself and stood. The walk out of the courthouse into the March afternoon was one of the better moments of Loretta Dupree's life. Not a triumphant moment, she was not a triumphant woman, had never been. The day was overcast, a flat gray light, the kind that softened everything and made the world look like a photograph taken a long time ago. Miss Celestine took her arm as they went down the steps, which was sensible because the knee was bad, and also because they were both old women, and old women looked after each other, and there was nothing shameful about that. "You did well in there," Miss Celestine said. "I told the truth," Loretta said. "That's all I did. Sometimes that's everything." They drove back to Magnolia Street. Loretta made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table the way they had sat on 100 Tuesday afternoons, and outside the window, the 4 o'clocks were beginning to push up through the February bare soil, tiny green shoots finding their way back, as they always did without being asked. The criminal investigation moved on its own timeline. Vivian had filed the referral materials with the DA's office, and an investigator had contacted Loretta in April to take her statement. She gave it clearly, fully, with dates from her composition notebook and the careful precision of someone who had been paying attention since October. The investigator was professional and thorough. She asked about the deed, about the notary stamp, about the chain of events that had led to its use. She asked about Darnell's access to Loretta's personal documents in her home. She also asked toward the end of their session about the broader financial history, the co-signed loan, the money given to Calvin, the 4 years of rent-free housing. Loretta answered everything. Near the end, the investigator looked up from her notes. "Ms. Dupree, I want to ask you something directly. Over the years, the loan, the housing, the money you gave your children, do you feel you were exploited by them?" Loretta thought about the question for a long time. "I feel," she said finally, "that I gave them things because I loved them and they needed them. And I feel that at some point, one of them decided that the giving was something he was owed, that there was more coming and he didn't want to wait for it." She paused. "I don't think Darnell is a bad man," she said. "I think he's a man who got confused about what was his. That happens, but it still can't stand." Darnell was indicted in June. The charges were felony fraud, specifically procuring a false notarization by use of a stolen stamp, and fraud in the inducement of a legal instrument. The DA's office had established through the investigation that the stolen stamp had traveled from Robert Arsenault's home in Gonzales to Baton Rouge through an intermediary, a man who knew both Darnell and the former notary's son, and who had facilitated the arrangement for a fee of $300. $300. Loretta had sat with that number for several days after Vivian told her. Her house, the house her grandmother had lived in, the house her mother had left her, the house where she had raised 3 children and buried her grief and planted 4 o'clocks. Every spring had been taken from her for the cost of $300 in a document she had signed while recovering from shingles. She did not let herself dwell on it. There was no useful thing to be done with dwelling. Calvin called her a week after the indictment. He was quiet on the phone, a different quiet from the careful neutrality of the past months. A more genuine quiet, the kind that comes when a person has been sitting with something and has finally arrived at what they actually think. "Mama," he said. "Calvin, I owe you an apology. When I called you back in October, when I told you what Darnell said about you being confused, you don't need to." "I need to say it," he said. "I knew better. I knew you weren't confused. I was scared of getting in the middle of something, and I used his words instead of my own judgment, and I'm sorry. You deserve better from me." Loretta was quiet for a moment. "You're saying it now," she said. "It's late." "It's not too late," she said. "Late and too late are different things." She heard him breathe out. "What do you need from me?" He asked. "Right now, nothing," as she said. "But I want you to know that the door is still open. It was always open. I didn't close it." Renee called the following week. She did not apologize. Renee rarely apologized, had never found it easy, a trait that had always made Loretta tender toward her in a particular way, the way you're tender towards someone who can't quite reach a thing they need. She cried a little and said she felt terrible about all of it and asked if Loretta was all right. "I'm all right," Loretta said. "I didn't know what he was doing," Renee said. "I want you to know that." "I believe you," Loretta said. "But Renee, you knew I'd been having trouble with my knee. You knew I'd applied for that grant. If you'd asked me about the house at any point, I would have told you what I found out. You didn't ask." A silence. "I was afraid of what I'd hear," Renee said. "I know," Loretta said. "That's the part you're going to have to sit with." They talked for a few more minutes about smaller things. When they hung up, Loretta did not feel resolved about Renee, did not feel the wound closed or the relationship restored to what it had been. But she thought realistic about it, which was something. Darnell's case moved through the system slowly as criminal cases did. His attorney negotiated. The evidence was what it was: the stolen stamp, the intermediary who had cooperated with investigators, the fraudulent deed in the parish records. There was not much to negotiate around. There was the question of degree and consequence, which was a conversation between lawyers in the DA's office and eventually a judge. In October, 13 months after Loretta had first called, Miss Celestine Darnell pleaded guilty to one count of fraud in connection with a notarized instrument. He was sentenced to 2 years of probation, a fine of $4,000, and mandatory restitution to Loretta for the legal costs she had incurred, approximately $6,200, which was less than a fraction of what the house was worth, but which Loretta had said she wanted paid because a debt acknowledged was a different thing from a debt ignored. He did not go to prison. Loretta had not asked for prison. She had asked for the record to be straight. It was. Vivian called her with the sentencing terms from her office on a Friday afternoon. "It's done," she said. "Yes," Loretta said. "It is. How are you feeling?" Loretta looked out the kitchen window. The 4 o'clocks had had a good year. They had come in full in bright pink and yellow and white, along the front walk, the same colors they had always been. "Tired," she said. "The good kind. The kind where you're tired because you finished something." "You did finish something," Vivian said. "You finished it correctly. A lot of people in your situation don't." "I know," Loretta said. "I've sat beside some of them." The home modification grant came through in December. The paperwork had been refiled after the deed challenge, and Loretta's ownership was now clear in the parish records, clean and uncontested. The grant covered the installation of a safety ramp at the front door, 2 gentle slopes flanking the original steps, with a grip rail along one side. It covered grab bars in the bathroom and a widened door frame and a new handheld shower head that could be lowered. Small things. Practical things. The kind of things that made a house livable for a woman whose knee was bad and who had spent 42 years making sure her home was ready for whatever came next. The contractor who installed everything was a young man from Plaquemine named Marcus, which made Loretta think of Dorothy Harmon's son in a way she could not have explained. He worked carefully. He cleaned up after himself. He asked before he moved anything. When he was done, he stood back and looked at his work with the satisfaction of a person who had done a thing well, and Loretta gave him a glass of sweet tea on the porch and paid him and thanked him and meant it. She sat on the porch after he left. The afternoon was mild, late November warmth. The Louisiana kind, soft and golden and temporary, the kind of afternoon that felt like a gift. The 4 o'clocks along the walk had gone brown for the season, but she could see the new growth already at their base, the green that wouldn't wait. It never waited. It came up every year without being asked. She thought about Henry. She thought about her mother. She thought about 31 years of early mornings driving to other people's houses, and the particular kind of love that came from that work. The love that did not ask to be seen, that did not expect return, that existed in the daily practice of showing up. She thought about her children, Calvin, who had called twice since October, and been both times the son she had raised, rather than the son who had stood aside while someone lied to her face. Renee, who was struggling in the particular way Renee had always struggled and who Loretta was not giving up on. Darnell, whose face she had not seen since the courthouse, and about whom she felt something she did not have a clean name for: not forgiveness, yet not never, but not yet. She thought, "I gave them everything I had. I would do it again. But I am not required to give them what is not mine to give. And I am not required to disappear because it would be convenient for them if I did." Miss Celestine came out of her own house across the street and raised her hand. Loretta raised hers back. She had not gone back to work. The knee made the physical demands of care work unrealistic, and she was old enough that she did not have to justify that to anyone. But she had started volunteering twice a month at the senior center where she had first heard about the home modification program. They used her in the resource room, helping older adults navigate paperwork benefits, housing medical forms. She was good at it. She had been navigating paperwork for other people since before most of the volunteers were born. She sat with a woman one morning, 71, from Denham Springs, whose daughter had been pressuring her to sign over her property, and who had come to the center, not sure what she was afraid of, but sure that she was afraid. Loretta listened to everything the woman said without interrupting. Then she said, "Here's what I want you to do. I want you to call this attorney." She wrote Vivian's name on a card, "And I want you to start writing things down. Every conversation, every document, every time something feels off. Write the date at the top. The woman looked at the card. Does it help? She asked, writing things down. It helped me, Loretta said. It might help you. The woman folded the card and put it in her purse. Loretta thought the work doesn't stop. It just changes shape. She had one more thing to do before the year turned. She drove to Gonzales 40 minutes on the interstate, the flat Louisiana landscape opening out around her, the refineries on the horizon breathing their pale smoke into the December sky. She had gotten the address from the public record. Robert Arsenault lived in a small brick house on a street of small brick houses. He was 71 and had a garden she could see the winter beds carefully maintained along the side of the house. She knocked on his door. He answered it himself. He was a slight man, retired with the look of someone who had spent his working life being careful and had found retirement disorienting. He looked at Loretta and she could see that he recognized the situation, if not her face, that some part of him had been expecting this. Mr. Arsenault, she said, my name is Loretta Dupree. Your stamp was used to notarize a deed on my property. I wanted to meet you. He looked at her for a moment. Please come in, he said. They sat in his living room. He told her what had happened, the stamp his son, the report he had filed, the investigation. He told her he was sorry. He told her that he had been a notary for 28 years and had never in that time been party to anything fraudulent, and that the knowledge of what his stamp had been used for after his retirement was something he had not fully recovered from. It was not your fault, Loretta said. No, he said, but it was my stamp. The fault was my son's, Loretta said, and whoever helped him, you did what you were supposed to do, you reported it. He was quiet. Did you get your house back, he asked. I did, she said. He nodded slowly. Good, he said. That's how it should go. They sat for a few more minutes, two old people in a living room in Gonzales, and Loretta thought about the strange paths that connect us to each other, the deed and the stamp and the theft and the report the caseworkers call and Miss Celestine's phone number and Vivian's name and the courtroom on St. Louis Street in this brick house at the end of a row of brick houses where an old man had kept careful records for 28 years and been robbed of his good name by someone who needed to use it. She thanked him and drove home. The house on Magnolia Street was lit from within when she arrived, the warm light showing through the windows, the new ramp at the front walk. She went up it carefully, the knee still complained, but less than it had before the surgery she had finally scheduled for February. Inside, she made tea. She sat at the kitchen table and opened her composition notebook to a blank page. She wrote the date. She wrote went to Gonzales, met R. Arsenault. He's a decent man. The fault was never his. She wrote the house is mine. It was always mine. Now everybody knows it. She closed the notebook. Outside, the 4 o'clocks were dormant under the December soil, already preparing to come up again in the spring, the way they always had, without being asked, without being given permission, simply because they were what they were, and this was what they did. Loretta turned off the kitchen light. She went to bed in her house on Magnolia Street in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where she had lived for 42 years. She slept well.